كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My dear students, hopefully you guys are very, very well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us, and we are starting this lesson 12 today for this session, inshallah. And what we're going to be covering here are a few things. There's quite a few things left yet. So what we're going to be discussing first is the verse in the Quran in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala discusses the spoils of war and who they're for and how that's been interpreted. So we'll inshallah discuss that. Then after that, there's going to be a discussion that regarding if a small group of people or individuals go into the enemy lands and manage to secure something, what happens with what does the khums and does the ghanima relate to that as well, and so on. Then there's a discussion that if a Muslim is to go into a non-Muslim land for some other reason, like for business or something, what is the status of what is the status of what they may see down there, and can they take something or whatever. There's also the discussion that if any of the Muslims are to deceive somebody and betray a contract, then they're not allowed to keep the whatever they attain through that. They have to actually give sadaqah, because betrayal is not allowed and that kind of deception is not allowed. And then there's going to be a discussion about non-Muslim residents with visa or whatever agreement it is with the Muslim lands. How are you supposed to deal with them? So this is where that discussion inshallah will come in. And also, how does a person from a Darul Harb become eventually a dhimmi? Like what do they have to do? So this is where that part of the discussion inshallah will take place. So having said that, I'll just read the verse to you, which is أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم واعلموا أنما غنمتم من شيء فأن لله خمسه وللرسول ولذي القربى واليتامى والمساكين وابن السبيل إن كنتم آمنتم بالله وما أنزلنا على عبدنا يوم الفرقان يوم التقى الجمعان والله على كل شيء قدير. Translation of this verse is, know that whatever spoils you take, 1/5 is for Allah and the Messenger. So listen carefully, 1/5 is for Allah and the Messenger. That was the 1/5 we've been discussing. His close relatives, orphans, the poor, and needy travelers. So that was the rest of that discussion. We've already explained the 3 categories. It's just that we didn't mention the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And if you truly believe in Allah, then he says, if you truly believe in Allah and what we revealed to our servant on that decisive day when the 2 armies met at Badr, and Allah is most capable of everything. So that is the verse in that context. It's been discussed. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so what the author does now, what Imam Quduri does, is that he says that the verse mentions the poor people and the orphans and the needy travelers, right? But it also mentions Allah and His Messenger. But we did not mention in the book that you give anything to Allah and His Messenger. So what's going on there? So then he discusses, he says, the way he discusses it, he's basically saying that Allah is just mentioned there. You don't give anything to Allah because Allah doesn't need. He's mentioned there for blessing, for barakah, right? His name is mentioned there for barakah and blessing. And the Prophet ﷺ, well, after the Prophet ﷺ has departed this world, that share no longer applies, because he is no longer with us in this, with this temporary world that we're in. So that was during his time. That would have been one of his way of one of his income, right? But that's no longer the case right now. So that's what he discusses. He says, وَأَمَّا ذِكْرُ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى فِي الْخُمُسِ, as far as the mention of Allah in the fifth, in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's words وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا غَنِيتُم مِّن شَيْءٍ فَأَنَّ لِلَّهِ خُمُسَهُ, that for Allah is 1/5 of it, along with the others. فَإِنَّمَا هُوَ لِإِفْتِتَاحِ الْكَلَامِ, that is just to begin the discussion. تَبَرُّكًا بِإِسْمِهِ تَعَالَى, to seek blessing from mentioning Allah's name. وَسَهْمُ النَّبِيِّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ سَقَطَ بِمَوْتِهِ, and the portion allotted for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam within that 1/5 has been now omitted because of his departure. كما سقط الصفي, and just as the Safi has been also omitted. What is the Safi? That is something that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to take and choose for himself from the ghanima. He was allowed to make a special selection, you can say, from the ghanima. For example, he could take a special coat of armor, or a sword, or one of the female slaves, or a slave. He could take whatever he wanted. This is mentioned in Sunan Abi Dawood and Sunan al-Nasai, Mustadrak and others, Sahih Hadith, and it's been mentioned in various other collections as well, that he had special discretion to take something special from there. But all of that obviously is finished now that the Prophet ﷺ has departed this transient world from us. Then he says, وَسَهْمُ ذَوِي الْقُرْبَى كَانُوا يَسْتَحِقُّونَهُ فِي زَمَنِ النَّبِيِّ صلى الله عليه وسلم بالنصرة له ألا يرى أنه علل فقال إنهم لن يزالوا معي هكذا في الجاهلية والإسلام وشبك بين أصابعه وبعده أي بعد وفاته صلى الله عليه وسلم بالفقر لانقطاع النصرة. Also, in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so the verse says فإن لله خمسه Allah وللرسول ولذي القربى. لذي القربى, that means the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's close family. Now we did discuss that, but we said that that was only those among them were entitled who were poor, basically, who didn't have their own assets or enough. So in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, though, even the wealthy among them, of his close family members, would be given from this, not just the poor. So that's what he's explaining, that the portion that was allotted for his close relatives, that was something that they were entitled to in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, due to their active and present assistance of the Prophet ﷺ as a tribe, right? That they would give them, that they would give to the Prophet ﷺ the support that they had extended. So they would get an incentive for that. They would be compensated for that. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, to show why he does that, إنهم لن يزالوا معي هكذا في الجاهلية والإسلام, that they have been exactly like this with me, both from the Jahiliyyah times and in Islam. If you remember, it was his family that willingly went to the valley or the ravines of Abu Talib when they were boycotted. They accepted the boycott from the whole of the Quraysh, but they supported him even though they weren't all necessarily believers. His uncle, who was the main part of that, Abu Talib, wasn't a believer, but he still supported him. So for giving support to the Prophet ﷺ from before to afterwards, they had a share. But since after the Prophet's departure, they're not supporting the Prophet ﷺ. So the poor among them still get a share, because any poor get a share anyway, but they're just given preference because they've been mentioned. So because they're no longer assisting the Prophet ﷺ, because the Prophet ﷺ has departed this world. Now who are these people? These are usually the Banu Hashim and the Banu al-Muttalib, because the Prophet ﷺ said that we're both the same. Now they were always the close ones. So that if you look at the Arab tribes of that time, there were 5 major tribes that were related to one another. 4 or 5. These two are very close to the Bani Hashim and the Bani al-Muttalib. So once, I think it was Uthman radiallahu anhu from the Banu Umayyah, who were extended relatives, they asked that, but we also are related to you, so how come they get extra? He said, because they've always been with me. They've always been extra close to me, and we've been always like one tribe. We've never kind of had a separation like that. Okay. MashaAllah. The next discussion, so that was a bit of a seerah discussion, but The next discussion here is ma la yukhammas. What kind of spoils are there where you don't take out the 1/5, where 1/5 is not deducted, right? So وَإِذَا دَخَلَ الْوَاحِدُ مِنْ مُسْلِمٍ, let's just say a lone Muslim goes and enters, or one or two, a few, into the abode of war to attack them without the permission of the Imam. So this is like just some kind of private thing they're doing, and they manage to secure some property there. لَمْ يُخَمَّسْ, the 1/5 doesn't have to come out of that. Because why is it justified for them to take? Because remember, when you're in a war with somebody, any mal that you're able to take from there and bring back, that because of istila, because of dominating it, it becomes yours, right? And it was not taken, but it's not considered to be ghanima. It's not considered ghanima, because this was taken by personal, because ghanima is what is taken by overcoming that whole area. These people didn't conquer anything. They just managed to take a few things from here and there. So this isn't going to be considered to be ghanima. Ghanima has to be by force of the army, by force of overcoming an area and conquering an area, not through stealing or taking surreptitiously. And since this is not going to be treated as ghanima, there's no 5th that to come out of it, because the 5th is only of ghanima, right? The verse is وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا غَنِمْتُم مِّن شَيْءٍ فَأَنَّ لِلَّهِ خُمُسَهُ. So the 1/5 only comes from ghanima. This is not even treated as spoils of war. Now, the reason he said without the permission of the authorization of the Imam, because if it was through authority and instruction of the Imam that they went in, then there are actually 2 opinions regarding whatever they take. One opinion is, and that is the more popular opinion, is that yes, this will be considered ghanima now, right? Because it was done with the force of the at least the state behind it, even though they weren't physically there. These guys went in, sneaked in essentially, or they went in however, right? That will be 1/5 will be deducted from there, so they can't take all of it. So and the other reason is that because if he sent them in, if they were sent in officially, then they would have to help them as well. If they ran into any trouble, they would have to help them. So essentially there is a whole setup there. So that's why it would be then taken as a ghanima, right? Then 1/5 would come out of it. Okay, now let's just say a larger group went in who have some strength. You know, they're a decent amount of group. It's not the full Muslim army, but there's a contingent of maybe 50, 100 people or something, and they took something. Yes, that they managed to capture something. 1/5 will have to be deducted from there, even if the Imam had not been the one to instruct them to go in or authorized to go in, because this will be considered ghanima, because this was taken by domination. Because if 40, 50 people went, they must have dominated at least a small area, and they've taken from there, because otherwise how else would you have taken? They're not going in to steal as such. They've dominated the area. So whenever anything is taken ala wajhil qahri wal ghalabati, when you've gone in and shown your might and dominated, then that's definitely ghanimat. And in that case, it would have been obviously, if anything happened to them and they needed help, the Imam would have sent some assistance to them and sent some help for them, right? Because if the Imam left them alone and forsook them, then that would be seen as huge weakness for the Muslims. So essentially, the Imam's put in a position where he has to assist them, right? And of course, they went in for good reasons, they didn't go in for, just to make some money on their own as such. They didn't go in there out of mischief. They actually went there, they thought they could do something. It's not encouraged, but if they did go, the Imam would obviously have to assist them, as opposed to 1 or 2 people, right? Because the Imam doesn't have to assist 1 or 2 people, right? That was the previous case, because 1 or 2 people are not necessarily seen as, being authorized as such. I mean, sometimes it could be, but it just depends. One other thing that Imam Maidani clarified here is that as long as this force that has gone in, this small group of people, or this group of people that have gone in, as long as they've got some power with them, right? Because if a group of people, however large, went in that had no capability, not proper weapons or anything like that, and they took something, then that would be kind of random. Then that they don't have to pay 1/5 from that, because that is just seen as them going and kind of like snatching things. That's not ghanima. There's no honor in that. They've just kind of gone in to do a bit of plundering or something like that. Right, so now the question that arises, that are people allowed to go in and just take whatever they want? How does that work? Especially if you've gone in with permission, with an agreement, with a visa, for example. وَإِذَا دَخَلَ الْمُسْلِمُ دَارَ الْحَرْبِ بِأَمَانٍ تَاجِرًا. If a Muslim goes and enters an abode of war, as for example a trader with permission to trade, because that's how it was, you got a visa to trade, business visa, whatever it was, or anything like that. You went in there for a conference, you went in there to to meet somebody, or as an envoy or whatever. فَلَا يَحِلُّ لَهُ أَن يَتَعَرَّضَ لِشَيْءٍ مِّنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ. It's not allowed for anybody, any of those people, to go in and then interfere with any of their wealth. You're not allowed to just go and pick up stuff. وَلَا لِشَيْءٍ مِّن دِمَائِهِمْ. And you're also not allowed to go and fight with them and spill any of their blood. That's not, because you went in with aman, otherwise you'd be deceiving. If you went in as a warrior, that's different, but you didn't go in as a warrior here. You went in with another hat on. You went in as a tajir, a trader or something like that. You're also not allowed to basically just have sexual intercourse and consider that somebody is a slave for you, or slave girl or something like that, because all of this is considered betrayal. This is not allowed. It's all considered betrayal, and betrayal is haram, he says. إِلَّا إِذَا صَدَرَ غَدَرٌ مِّن مَلِكِهِمْ. Unless, of course, the betrayal starts from their leader, not from individuals, because individuals might do something crazy to you. That doesn't justify the breaking of their covenant. The covenant is broken if their leader does something like that. أو مِنْهُمْ بِعِلْمِهِ. Right? Or he authorizes somebody to do that and you're 100% sure that that's what happened. وَلَمْ يَأْخُذْ عَلَى يَدِهِمْ. And then he doesn't stop the people who are maybe interfering with you. لأن النقد يكون من جهتهم. Then in that case, obviously, if they have broken the contract or the covenant, then of course, then you no longer are required to keep it up. Now, Imam Maidani says that Imam Quduri mentions and qualifies this with a person being a trader who's entered, because if they have a prisoner of war, if they've captured some of the Muslims as prisoners of war, and so obviously they're going to be there with the knowledge and everything of their captors, of the Ahlul Harb. So that person, for him, because he's not there on a visa as such, he's there against his will. For him, he can somehow, if he gets out of there, he can actually take their wealth. For him, it's mubah. For him, it's permissible. He can also kill people if, he can kill his captors and others to get out of there, because he's there against his will. He's not made any contract with them. They just captured him. So he can do whatever he wants, right, in that sense. Right. If a Muslim does and has, for however reason, snatched something, stolen something, taken something against the contract with them, then وَإِن تَعَدَّى التَّاجِرُ وَنَحْوُهُ غَدَرَ بِهِمْ وَأَخَذَ شَيْئًا مِّن مَالِهِمْ وَخَرَجَ بِهِ عَنْ دَارِهِمْ مَلَكَهُ مِلْكًا مَحْظُورًا. So if a trader or somebody else who's gone in there with a, for another reason, and he manages to take something, and he manages to then bring it out as well, he will become the owner of it, but he's become the owner of haram wealth. So it's kind of this hybrid situation where he is the owner of it, so it is his now because he's secured it here, but it's actually haram wealth, so he can't benefit it. Why is it considered that he becomes owner of it? Is because ultimately, because of the war state, their wealth is considered halal, right? Except that because he attained that permissible wealth through impermissible means, through deception, through betrayal, that's why it becomes polluted wealth. It becomes khabith wealth. Look at this, subhanallah. لأن المؤمنين عند شروطهم, because believers, they abide by their conditions. So he will be commanded to يتصدق به, to donate it. He won't be able to keep it. He's not going to return it back there, because ultimately it was permissible to take, but not in an impermissible way. He took it in an impermissible way, so he has to give sadaqah of it to the poor. تَفْرِيغًا لِذِمَّتِهِ, just so that he, you can say, gets rid of it from his liability. So he removes the liability of it, وَتَدَارُكًا لِجِنَايَتِهِ, and in order to make up for this wrong that he has done. So he can't use it. Right, the next section that we'll do today is how do you deal with Ahlul Harb, people of the abode of war, the non-Muslims that come to live in Muslim lands. وَإِذَا دَخَلَ الْحَرْبِيُّ إِلَيْنَا مُسْتَأْمِنًا أي طَالِبًا لِلْأَمَانِ. So if he comes in with a visa, right, he's asking for safety and he gets it, the Muslims give it to him. لم يمكن أن يقيم في دارنا سنة فما فوقها. He's not going to be allowed to live for a year or more. He can stay resident for less than a year, but he's not allowed to settle there forever, right? As a person of that place who retains the passport of that place, for example, right? And he's here just literally on a temporary basis. لِأَلَّا يَصِيرَ عَيْنًا لَهُمْ, so that he does not become a spy for them. Now, that's a bit strange, because he could be a spy for less than that time. He could come for 1 week and be a spy, right? وَعَوْنًا عَلَيْنَا. But I guess the wisdom here is that if you let them live for a year or more, which is already a lot, then they will set up their own internal system and could create sabotage and start a base. So he will become an assistant for them. So don't let them stay for too long, essentially. وَيَقُولُ لَهُ الْإِمَامِ إِذَا أَمَّنَهُ. The Muslim authorities will say to such a person when they're allowing them the visa to come in to the abodes of the Muslim, is إِنْ أَقَمْتَ فِي دَارِنَا تَمَامَ السَّنَةِ وَضَعْتُ عَلَيْكَ الْجِزْيَةِ. If you do stay resident here for a complete year, or of course more, you're going to be treated as a dhimmi. You're going to have to then pay the poll tax. Now I know that some people will be thinking, well, they could still be, even despite that, they would still be, they can still do espionage, yes, but this is just what it is, that after that they're not going to be treated as a harbi anymore. You'll have to be a dhimmi, then they have to do certain things that the dhimmi does. Now the principle they're looking at here is أن الحربية لا يمكن من إقامة دائمة في دارنا إلا بالاسترقاق أو الجزية, saying that there's only two ways that a harbi, who still considers himself from an abode of war, there's only two ways that they could be justified to stay in a Muslim land for a year or more, and that is, one is either by becoming a Ahlul Dhimma, a person who pays the protection tax, or if he was a slave, for example. فَصَلْنَا بَيْنَهُمَا بِسَنَةٍ. No, sorry. لأنه يصير أو الجزية لأنه يصير عينا له وعونا علينا فتلحق المضرة بالمسلم, because that's harmful otherwise, right, to them, for us to leave them like that. ويمكن من الإقامة اليسيرة. They should be allowed to stay for short periods of time, because they're humans. We need to deal with one another. So that's a possibility that, that's a need. So yes, allow them to come for short periods of time. لأن في منعها قطع الميرة والجلب. If you do stop them and put a complete ban on them coming in, that is actually going to then stop any kind of supply, right? That's going to essentially affect the supply chains, supply of provision, supply of trade, because they might be there for trade. They're there for something else, training or whatever the case is. وَسَدَّ بَابِ التِّجَارَةِ, and of course it will close the door of trade, and that's not useful, because we need that to survive. فَفَصَلْنَا بَيْنَهُمَا بِسَنَةٍ. So he said, okay, fine, we give them a year, up to a year, or up to just less than a year to stay there. لأنها مدة تجب فيها الجزية, because usually a jizya is paid every year. So if a non-Muslim is staying in a Muslim land for a year, other Muslims who are residents, they would have paid a jizya by now. So these people will do that as well. So then we're going to say, okay, that's justified that we're benefiting from you staying there. فَإِنْ رَجَعَ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ قَبْلَ تَمَامِ السَّنَةِ إِلَى وَطَنِهِ فَلَا سَبِيلَ عَلَيْهِ. Yes, if he returns on the day before the year is up, then he doesn't have to pay jizya. So that's how it is. They have to stay. It's like you got 6 months visa, and then people leave just before that, and then they go out and then they come back. But that's because it's automated systems. That's why usually that works nowadays. Wallahu alam how it worked in those days, but hopefully that's clear. How does a person of Ahlul Harb who has come in with a visa, how does he become a dhimmi? So you've already got the idea. He says, وَإِنْ أَقَامَ تَمَامَ السَّنَةِ, if he does reside there for a whole year, أُخِذَتْ مِنْهُ الْجِزْيَةِ, he will have to then pay the poll tax. He will then have to pay the protection tax. وَصَارَ ذِمِّيًّا, and then he will be treated as the other inhabitants who are there, as permanent residents. وَلَمْ يُتْرَكْ بَعْدَهَا يَرْجِعْ إِلَى دَارِهِ. And this is the issue though. You might be thinking, well, they might just stay. Okay, we'll stay for, over a year. No problem. We'll pay the jizya. Right? So this is the issue that is going to differentiate now. However, now they're not going to be allowed to go back. They become dhimmis. Dhimmis are not allowed to go back. Right? Unless they escape or something. So وَلَمْ يُتْرَكْ بَعْدَهَا يَرْجِعْ إِلَى دَارِ الْحَرْبِ لِأَنَّ عَقْدَ الذِّمَّةِ لَا يُنْقَضْ. Because once you make this contract with them of dhimma and protection, you're liable for them. So now you can't allow them to go. Right? Unless it's for very specific reasons. You're not allowed them. Otherwise you'd be breaking the contract with them. Because they're not safe anymore. They are your citizens now. They could be attacked down there. So this, if a non-Muslim from the abode of war wanted to come and stay here, then they have to think very carefully that if they want to stay here for a year or more, they're going to have to become permanent citizens. There's no other option. So either you stay for less than a year or you become a citizen. That's essentially what it is. وَلِلْإِمَامِ أَنْ يُوَقِّتَ فِي ذَلِكَ مَا دُونَ السَّنَةِ كَالشَّهْرِ وَالشَّهْرَيْنِ. Yes, now you might be thinking that what is this year? Because a year is very long for a person to stay anyway. However, the Imam has a discretion to lessen this time. That okay, we're only going to allow people to come in with a visa for 2 weeks. No more than 2 weeks. Or 1 month. Or 6 months. Or 4 months. So this 1 year is not it's mentioned in the Quduri, but it is actually not something that is binding. So it could be less than that. The Imam could do less than that. Okay, so this guy comes in. He stays there for whatever number of months. وَإِنْ عَادَ الْمُسْتَأْمِنُ إِلَى دَارِ الْحَرْبِ وَلَوْ إِلَى غَيْرِ دَارِهِ وَتَرَكَ وَدِيعَةً عِنْدَ مَعْصُومٍ مُسْلِمٍ أَوْ ذِمِّيٍّ أَوْ تَرَكَ دَيْنًا فِي ذِمَّتِهِمْ فَقَدْ صَارَ دَمُهُ مُبَاحًا بِالْعَوْدِ لِبُطْلَانِ أَمَانِهِ. Now this is interesting. Let's just say that the guy came and he left some of his property here in the Darul Islam. But now he's gone back. Right? Now remember, for a Harbi, his possessions are permissible for us to take in some way or the other. Now this guy had come in, and at that time he was safe and his assets were protected because he had permission. He had a visa. Now he's gone. He no longer has permission. He no longer has a visa. He's no longer considered to have that security. So that's why he's saying that when he leaves, even if he has not gone back home and he's gone somewhere else, but he's left the Darul Islam, right? He's left his residence there. This was for when it's less than a year, because after that he can't leave anyway. But let's just say he left, and he's left something for safekeeping by a Muslim or somebody else who is secure, right? Whether he's a Muslim or non-Muslim. Or for example, let's just say that somebody owes him money and he didn't claim that money yet. His blood, his life has become permissible by him returning. So his own life has become, he's become a Harbi again, right? Because he no longer has the visa. And whatever property he has left, because he might have not been able to take it all, in the Darul Islam, that is obviously at risk now, right? لأن يد المعصوم عليه باقية. The reason why it's not fully open yet, because it's in the possession of a safe person, right? Either a Muslim or a Dhimmi. So they're looking after it. So until then it's considered safe in a sense, but it's in a hybrid situation. Now, فَإِذَا أُسِرَ, if this person is then recaptured or captured, أو قُتِلَ, or he is killed, سَقَطَتْ دُيُونُهُ, all of his debts are cancelled. They don't owe anybody his inheritance or anything. They don't owe, the people who owed him a debt from the Muslim lands don't owe him anything. or don't owe his inheritors anything. Reason is that the technical reason, once he's killed or imprisoned, then it's like he loses even the safety that he had due to his wealth being in the hands of safe given people, right? Once he's dead and that wealth in their hands becomes free for anybody to take. But since they're the ones who are holding on to it, it becomes theirs, because they're the first person to go for it. Because remember, when there's something, let's just say there's grass outside, or there's nice spring that's commonly owned by everybody, then whoever goes and fills up first, that becomes theirs. The other one can't say, hey, that's mine. They've already secured it. So these people are there, it's in their possession, so they're going to secure it. So it becomes theirs. That's why he's saying, أُسْبِقَ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ أَسْبَقُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ يَدِ الْعَامَّةِ. Their possession of it, their control over it, obviously supersedes everybody else's because they're the first to it. So it's going to become theirs, so it's going to drop. وَصَارَتِ الْوَدِيعَةُ وَمَا عِنْدَ شَرِيكِهِ وَمُضَارِبِهِ وَمَا فِي بَيْتِهِ فِي دَارِنَا فَيْئًا. So all of his items that were there for safekeeping with other people in safe security boxes or whatever it was, or whatever, if he had a partner in business and there were some assets that he left behind there, or whatever it is, or whatever he had left in his home there, all of that becomes mal ghanima. Right, all of that becomes mal ghanima. They can take it. Now the last section of this, the last part of this that we'll cover, he says, وَمَا أُخِذَ مِنْ أَمْوَالِ أَهْلِ الْحَرْبِ بِدُونِ قِتَالٍ. The assets that are taken from the people of the abode of war, the residents of the abode of war, without any kind of fight. What is the ruling of that? وَمَا أَوْجَفَ عَلَيْهِ الْمُسْلِمُونَ أَسْرَعُوا إِلَى أَخْذِهِ مِنْ أَمْوَالِ أَهْلِ الْحَرْبِ بِغَيْرِ قِتَالٍ يُصْرَفْ جَمِيعُهُ فِي مَصَالِحِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ كَمَا يُصْرَفُ الْخَرَاجُ وَالْجِزْيَةُ. So remember, the only way you can overcome them is through a fight, is through battle. So that's why even the small contingents that were going in, they had to overcome and do it. If it was just stolen or if it was just taken like that without a battle, then that's different. So that's what they're discussing here, that whatever is taken without a battle, right, without combat. So he's saying that whatever the Muslims manage to secure or take, right, from the wealth of the people of the people of Harb, meaning the people of the abode of war, without any kind of fight or combat, all of it will be returned, all of it will be put into the benefit of the Muslimin. So it will be for the general welfare of the Muslimin. They'll build maybe roads or maybe some other facilities. Those people can't keep that wealth. Like you went in and there was some stuff and you just took it, put it in your pocket and you went. They're not allowed to keep that. This will have to be given to the same recipients, the same places that kharaj is spent. We're going to discuss Ushr and Kharaj in the next lessons, inshallah. So where the Kharaj, which means the land tax is spent. Likewise where the poll tax, the jizya is spent. لأنه حصل بقوة المسلمين من غير قتال فكان كالخراج والجزية. Because this was taken without any fight, without any combat, but it was taken by some kind of strength from the Muslims, right? They showed some kind of strength in this regard. So it was taken by them without any kind of battle, because when it's a battle then it becomes malul ghanima, and that's spoils of war, you can keep that. But this one is more like kharaj, where you've left the non-Muslims to look after their land but then to pay a tax. We'll discuss that tax in the coming section, but that's what that one is. Or jizya, the security tax that they pay, that is used for which we'll discuss, that is used for it's not for the individuals but it's for the poor, and it's for other things of the state that we will be discussing. So this is very, very different. So that's why he ends this chapter with that discussion. So inshallah, now what we're going to do is we're going to just conclude this chapter, and then inshallah in the next lesson we'll be discussing Ushr and Kharaj, inshallah. So by this we move on to the conclusion, inshallah. So to conclude lesson number 12, what we covered today was, we first clarified that in the verse of Surah Al-Anfal, verse number 41, we clarified what it meant about a share for Allah and His Messenger. That a share for Allah is not really a share, it's just barakah that we're using in His name. And for the Prophet ﷺ, that the share was the share was allotted to him while he was alive. Now that he's gone, it's not there. It will just be spent for the rest of the faqir and the poor people and the orphans and so on. And then after that, we also discussed that in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the family of the Prophet ﷺ, the close family, they would receive a share even if they were wealthy. But after that, because they would help the Prophet ﷺ, but after the Prophet ﷺ departed this world, only if they're poor will they be entitled. Then we had a discussion that if there were just a few individuals or one or two people that went in and took something from the enemy lands, we discussed that that is not something that they will have to, that's not going to be considered the spoils of war, and if it's not spoils of war, then no fifth have to come out of it, right? But then we had a discussion that if there's a larger group that went in even without the authorization of the imam, then they would, that whatever they take will be treated, right, will be treated as spoils of war. So 1/5 will have to come out of that. A reason for that is the imam is going to have to support them if anything goes wrong, so they do have the state does have their back as such. Then after that, we had a discussion that if somebody goes in with a visa, with a covenant into non-Muslim lands, they can't just start taking stuff. They can't start killing people. That would be haram and wrong for them to do that because they've made an agreement. For example, if they've gone in as a trader, for instance, right? And if a trader or somebody else who's gone in for another reason does go and betray them somehow, take something of their property, comes and brings it out into the Muslim lands, so yes, he will become the owner of it, but because he's done it wrongly, he's done it in an incorrect way, it will be what you call corrupt wealth, right? And it won't be pure for him to consume. He will have to give sadaqah of it. He will have to give it away in charity to take away its liability, right? He doesn't have to return it to the non-Muslim lands, but he will let the poor benefit from that. Likewise, if a non-Muslim comes out to our lands, meaning the Muslim lands, with a visa, they are not allowed to stay there for more than a year, for a year or more, right? Of course, that's the standard, but there's a discretion for the imam to make that 2 months or whatever he wants, because it's saying that if they stay for any longer, they'll do spying work or whatever, they'll be involved in espionage. So the imam can decide how long they can stay there for. If they do want to stay longer than that, they would then have to literally give up their residence elsewhere and become a dhimmi, and thus start paying dhimma by paying the poll tax, right? Now the issue with that is they can never return to being anything else after that. They can't give up being a dhimmi once they are a dhimmi, so they'd have to otherwise leave or stay there and become a dhimmi once that maximum period is up, right? And then there was the final discussion, which is that if a harbi was staying with us in the Muslim lands with permission visa, but then after that they left, right? They left something behind, either with somebody else or whatever the case is, then that nobody can take that yet because it's in the hands of a safe person, whether that's a Muslim or a non-Muslim, because it's there for safekeeping. However, if that same person, if that same harbi was eventually killed or imprisoned, now he becomes, his wealth now becomes free for anybody to take. However, the person who already have it, meaning the person that owe him that money or that are safekeeping for him, they're the first person who have control over it. So it's just like the situation where there's something permissible for anybody to take, so whoever takes it first, he gets it. So it's the people who owe him that money, they will keep it. People who have his assets in safekeeping, they will be able to keep it. In fact, all of the debts that were owed to that harbi will be dropped. Those people are no longer liable anymore because his wealth has all become permissible for somebody to take. And then we also discussed that anything that the Muslims might take without a battle from the non-Muslims, right? From the Ahlul Harb, not non-Muslims overall in general, but from the people of Harb, from their lands or whatever it is, they're not allowed to spend that on themselves. That would have to be spent on the welfare of the Muslims, right? That would have to be spent on the welfare of the Muslims. So that ends our 12th lesson, and inshallah we're benefiting, we're understanding this, and we'll see you inshallah in the next lesson to discuss Ushr and Kharaj. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Please keep us, White Thread staff, students, supporters, and the wise Prince Ghazi and all the other scholars there, and all of the other teachers and everybody there, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all of us and accept you as well.